So, can you take me back? How did the two of you first meet?
We first met when I moved to San Francisco back in 1996. I was fresh out of college. I just graduated and decided to move to San Francisco with no money, no place to live, no job, nothing. And my parents were like, "You're an idiot. You're cut off." So that only made me more determined to make it. I was kind of basically homeless when I first got here. I lived in an SRO, which was kind of harrowing. But eventually, you put one foot in front of the other and sort of started to figure out how to make it. But one of the first places I went when I got here was to the Stud Bar on a Tuesday night because I saw an ad in one of the gay rags for a nightclub called Tranny Shack. And Heklina's floating face was on the club ad, and it said, I think it was $2 to get in, or something. Maybe it was $5 to get in, and $2 beers or $1 beers. Anyways, it was amazing. It sounded too good to be true. It said drag show, and I remember it said free makeup tips. So I went and quickly became good friends with Heklina. I mean, immediately I knew that's where I belonged. It was the punk rock, irreverent, sort of wild club, which at the time the word tranny wasn't a pejorative in San Francisco. It was definitely a community term that was inclusive of anyone who deviated from the gender binary at all. So it really was a club for all the queer misfits. And both the people on stage and off stage, unlike today, this was when drag fans and drag audiences were maybe as interesting, if not more interesting than the people on stage. So it was amazing, and it's where I found all my family and friends and many people who I work with still today. But Heklina was the person who, from 1996 to the day that she passed, we were basically creating together, working together, friends for almost 30 years. We were just kindred spirits.
Do you recall, like, what were your early collaborations together?
Well, a lot of stuff happened at Tranny Shack because that was sort of for the first 2 years, that was where I played and I was, drag was a hobby. It wasn't at the time, it wasn't, maybe even Heklina had a job. I mean, we all had jobs. Maybe Heklina could see a future where she could turn it into a business, but I certainly did not. And so, um, we were kind of doing it for the sake of fun. And so she and I collaborated on numbers and performances. And then I started an event called Midnight Mass in 1998, which was my midnight movie series, which was really an offshoot in many ways of Tranny Shack. But Midnight Mass was mine and Tranny Shack was hers. However, we collaborated a lot on both those projects. And when she eventually decided to start taking Tranny Shack on the road up to Seattle and to London and to LA and other places, I was the person who would go in and run Tranny Shack in San Francisco while she was gone. So we were really connected, creatively, also in a familial sense. Heklina was estranged often from her mother, and my mother adored her, like just loved her so much. So Heklina even had, spent holidays with my family, even holidays I wasn't there for. So she wasn't just a colleague, or a friend. She really was family. And, like family, we never had a falling out where we stopped talking for an extended period of time the way you would with like a friend or something. But we did have fights like siblings would. We could blow up at each other. I mean, one of the things that was about that I loved was that it was safe to get angry with each other because you knew the other person wasn't going anywhere.
What was the importance of those events to the community? Like, why were people so excited about them?
I don't know. And quite frankly, from the point of view of Tranny Shack, I actually think that I loved Tranny Shack as much um, as a viewer, as a spectator, as someone who was a fan of it, as someone who was also involved with it because, of course, if I wasn't in the show, I actually enjoyed not being in the show because I loved going and watching the show. And I think that I can kind of speak for other people in the audience at both events, Training Check and Midnight Mass. We were coming out of a time of real darkness in the queer community. Especially San Francisco, where a lot of death, I mean, a good decade of just really brutal, horrible loss, ravaged the community. And in 1996, when I landed in San Francisco, that was when the first cocktail appeared that, it was a combination of drugs that seemed to work, and it was the first sense of hope that I think people had. I remember going to hospitals and saying goodbye to friends, and some friends we lost and some we didn't. And this was the first time when people were not necessarily always dying. And that, I think, brought out this need for celebration. But there was also anger, there was rage, there was sort of this sense of this isn't business as usual. And I think that the drag reflected that. It was grungy, it was horrific, it was political, it could be beautiful, but also angry, it could be violent. It was just very exciting. It was an exciting time for all those reasons and a real mix of emotions. So I think that's what spoke to people the most. And it was chaotic. I mean, complete and utter chaos.
Oh yeah, I fondly recall those shows. I mean, Midnight Mass and going to the stud and like all that stuff. You never know what you were going to get in terms of what people had planned and what you were going to get in terms of what surprised everybody.
Yeah. It was, I mean, I look back on it now and I'm just amazed at what we got away with. And I'm really, really grateful that there weren't more serious like casualties and things. I mean, Midnight Mass, there were a few of us that ended up in the hospital. That's no exaggeration. There was a night when I was almost arrested. I'm actually surprised I wasn't arrested. So yeah, you were there. You remember. People, there was this great moment last year where we had a benefit for Pippi Lovestocking, who is a dear friend, also a Tranny Shack sister and best friend of Heklina's, who sadly has had a health crisis, and we had a benefit for her in Palm Springs. And part of the benefit was showing this documentary about Tranny Shack called Filthy Gorgeous, which really never got distributed because of the music rights. And so it was kind of this forgotten film, this lost film, and I invited all these young people from LA, friends of mine, like Thomas Dekker and the Twins and my movie All About Evil, and a bunch of people who just, just said, "Hey, you should come to Palm Springs. We're doing this benefit for Pippi." Well, what was really great about that was their reaction to that movie, which I never even thought about. I never thought, and they were so floored by it. And this is a generation of people who grew up with Drag Race, and they came up to us and said, we had no idea. We had no idea that that's the kind of drag you were doing or where you came. Like, we just didn't know. Never even conceived of drag like that. So it's interesting because I hadn't really thought about it being that special. But through their eyes, I was able to go, hey, this was really cool and special and I mean, they were floored by, Vincenzo setting the venue on fire and all the antics. I hope that movie, maybe we need to get it out in some sort of underground, black market internet way, because I think people should see it.
Jumping ahead to the creation of Oasis and having spaces like that, what is the importance of having queer owned and queer led spaces, and especially with a name like Oasis? What significance does that name have?
That was actually the original name of that venue, which a lot of us didn't know because I moved here in the mid 90s. And you and I think when I was, at that space, I forget what it was called. It had sort of a Latin name. Do you remember? I don't remember. It was something I forget, but I'd gone there for a few dance nights, over the years, and I had heard that it had been a bathhouse and that there was a pool in the center of it, and a lot. And I was always friends with older people, Timmy Spence and Mad Magda, and I'm still very good friends with older people, which I highly recommend young queer people do because there's so much that you can learn from people who've come before you, and they, valued that space as a queer safe space from like the 70s. And so to see it return to queer owners like Darcy and Heklina, who ended up reopening it and renaming it its original name, Oasis, and it basically reflecting what it's named after, which is an oasis. And even in San Francisco, maybe now more than ever, we can't take these spaces for granted because as we've seen with, the allyship of I don't know, companies like Target or whatever, we've seen how how full of shit it all is and how hollow it is. And how quick it is to turn when the going gets tough. And so to have queer spaces owned by queer people, creating work and entertainment and for queer people by queer people. I think now I'm really so pissed off about this whole like DEI thing. Not that I'm surprised by the administration's audacity. I'm surprised by the corporation's willingness to just go along with it. And if ever it was obvious that we need to mobilize and have our own spaces and spend our own dollars, and I'm speaking about really any minority, queer people, black folks, especially women, I mean, now more than ever, like we're seeing they don't have our backs at all. Anyway, I could go on and on.
And I want to ask you about your experience in London. What was your first inkling that the police there were not taking the case as seriously as they should have?
It wasn't while I was in London, and that's what's so upsetting about it. And I did feel like I was getting, how should I say it? I was being very well treated by the people whose job it was to treat me well. There was a detective who was very engaged with me. That detective introduced me to a family liaison who was kind of nurturing. The man who took my statement, at the scene of, the apartment where we were staying, where I found, and just to backtrack, this is all centered around me, finding my friend Heklina dead in our apartment. And me quickly realizing that she wasn't alone when she passed, and me talking to the detectives about that, and being so shocked and so confused that the people that were kind of maybe not as kind or maybe even grossed out or hostile towards us, there was interference being run between me and them, but they were there. And I did quickly learn that if I went to the wrong person, I would get sort of a dismissive attitude, maybe even something rude. That being said, the people that I was engaging with were so good at what they do that I believed them. I believed that they were going to keep me in the loop, that they were going to do all the things they said they were going to do. They were going to get to the bottom of what happened, that when they said there was no foul play, that they knew something that I didn't know. I believed them. I believed all of it. And I assumed, based on the fact that they repeatedly were telling me that there were drugs found, that we were going to find out that unfortunately maybe it was a lethal combination of drugs in the toxicology report, something like that. And so when months and months and months went by with them not replying to my emails, and not just me, also next of kin, it wasn't just because I wasn't next of kin, they weren't replying to any of us. We've still almost 2 years later not received a cause of death, not received a death certificate. That's how I've realized. And then the way it's all been handled when they've been pressured to deal with us, um, as well as my own due diligence now as far as research goes. I did not know. I was naive to the fact that England, especially London, has a rich history of systemic homophobia built into its ranks, quite frankly, with many, many, many cases, being unfairly treated, overlooked. That I didn't know about that grinder serial killer. Now I'm just horrified, because I'm learning all this stuff, and quite frankly, now I can say they have completely uh, been inept, willfully inept, not a little bit. I mean, and I could go into great detail with you about this because it's that ridiculous. I mean, example after example after example, things
Yeah,
like me teaching them how to unlock her phone and telling them all the answers they looked for were in these three apps. The men they're looking for are in these three apps, teaching them, getting a hack from Apple to get her phone unlocked, and then finding out months later they return it to Nancy. And months after that, when we're on a call and I say, "Well, what did you find out in the phone?" They said we were never able to unlock it. It's like, what?
after you had told them.
Yeah. They never contacted me to say they had trouble. They knew I had a connection with Apple. I live in San Francisco. Of course, I have someone who's going to sneak around and help us out with the back end. Heklina was beloved. And I never told them, I never felt the need to say, hey, by the way, we're really important. A lot of people really like us. It wasn't until I was going back and asked for clarity around some questions because I was returning to do a show at the Royal Albert Hall. And I incidentally used the words, I'm doing my show at the Royal Albert Hall and I'm doing a lot of press for it. And the press have questions because the last time I was here was when my friend died, that they responded and they were very interested in knowing about me and the Royal Albert Hall. They seemed almost shocked by it. So, it just was sort of like, oh, wow, you guys are fucking assholes. Like, wouldn't think I need to give you my resume for you to, move on this case where someone may have been, killed, at least in a way that my gut is that if it was an accident, someone didn't help, you know.
Yeah.
That was always my thought. But now that more and more time has gone by, now I don't know what to think. They released that CCTV footage of the three men. Uh, I never knew there were three men there. I mean, they've known all along. And you know how they've known all along? And the way I know they knew is because when they took my passport, I was so shocked by everything. I didn't realize that it was because I was a suspect. You know what I mean? Like, but which makes sense, right? Friend calls and says, "Hey, I found my friend dead." I mean, of course I'm a suspect. I know enough about true crime, but my thoughts were so clouded and I was in such a state of shock that I didn't really know. And when they returned my passport to me and said, "We've determined no foul play, you're free to leave the country," I said to them, "How do you know there's no foul play? And how do you know that I wasn't there?" And they said, "We used CCTV footage to clear you." So they've had the CCTV footage showing three, quite frankly, scary looking guys
Yeah.
going into that apartment at
And
3 a.m. and I find her dead at 9 a.m. Come on. It's insanity.
I saw an interview with Nancy. This is Nancy French, who's a friend of
Mhm.
Heklina's and executor of the estate.
Yep.
That Nancy said that they admitted to her that there may have been some investigative bias,
They
which is
admitted it to both of us. Yeah. It was on one of the Zoom calls.
they said
Yeah.
they used those words.
Absolutely. Because we were really saying to them, how could this just be ignored for all these months? And Detective Dean Purvis, who apparently is some hotshot big shit there, because everyone's like, we're gonna set up a meeting with you and Dean Purvis. Um, we were like, we've never heard from this woman, this detective. She's not been communicating with us. And then that's when he said, well, quite frankly, I'm afraid I have to admit, I believe there's been some bias brought by her to this case, and she may be have overlooked it due to her own personal bias. And we were like, what? But actually, it's like, well, that actually, it's better for them to admit it in some ways.
Do you know who that investigator with the bias was?
I forget her name. And also they shuttled somebody like the guy that was the original investigator who I quite liked while I was in London and I believed. My gut is that like any police organization or any sort of bureaucratic organization that there are probably some good people and that they're also up against some big forces. Um, What gets really crazy, Matt, is that the reason we had the meeting with Dean Purvis is because an anonymous person reached out to me from Westminster Morgue to tell me you and Nancy are being lied to. They know exactly who was in that apartment, and they're not going to ever go after that person.
Did that informant say like they know exactly who is in, they know their identity, or they just have the footage, or
They said they'd talk to that person.
wow.
Now, this is a huge accusation, but, and the person, of course, was worried about losing their job, but I think a lot more is going to come out, hopefully. I mean, certainly they've just also they claimed on the BBC that they're to the BBC that they had apologized to me and Nancy, and that's what the BBC led with. Like the Met Police they never apologized to us. I guess they think they apologized by way of the BBC telling us that they apologized. That was the first I ever got an apology, and I don't really consider it an apology really because it's like they told the BBC they were sorry. Uh, so I think right now they're scrambling a bit, and they did just send Nancy a pretty, chunky letter saying, this is what we're doing. I mean, all the stuff that they should have been communicating 2 years ago,
Hmm.
and they want to have a conversation with her, and I believe with me. Uh, we'll see. They may not want to talk to me because Nancy's asking if I can be part of the meeting. She would like me to be there, but I'm now enemy number one because I've just not been keeping my mouth shut. So we'll
Yeah.
see.
Well, I yeah. So it sounds like they do have some new information that they are.
I don't buy it.
Yeah. Okay.
Like there was an article in the Chronicle, I think that's the one you're referring to, where the headline was a bit misleading. It kind of made you think that there was some sort of breakthrough. And to me, it's like, well, I don't think there's been any breakthrough. They haven't gotten into the phone as far as I know. The CCTV footage has existed since April of 2023. They don't, they claim they don't know who those people are. I don't see there being any breakthrough.
Hmm.
I think I think they have a lot to answer for, and I hope someday we get those answers.
What for now do you want people to know or do, or is there anything that people can do to support
Well,
pressure?
one thing that I think could be helpful, based on what I'm learning, because of course I've never been in this position before, is to use our own elected officials here as Americans, as Californians, as people who uh, vote for folks to advocate on behalf of Heklina. And apparently that can really make a difference. And so, if you can reach out to anyone, really, Nancy Pelosi, whoever, calling their offices, making them aware of this situation, saying that it's important that we get answers, it makes it much easier for the embassy actually in London to do their job. All of this political bullshit, it all matters. And the more people we can rally, um, in that way, the better. I don't think that contacting the Met at this point is going to do very much. And there is part of me that's considering, depending on what happens between now and the anniversary of her death, being 2 years, I've talked to some of my queer friends and family in England because I've been performing there for 15 years. I have so many people, so many performers that I love. We're talking about, depending on where we're at, doing some sort of like I'll fly over and do a protest of some sort, a big giant queer protest. That's definitely about Heklina, but also about this history that they have, It's a really ugly history. I didn't know, and the more I learn, the more I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the meantime, as folks are getting involved and helping you with amp up that pressure and stuff, just how do you want folks to remember Heklina, or how do you think Heklina would want to be
Mm.
remembered?
I think one, I owe it to her to keep screaming all this from the rooftop because Heklina was morbid and dark, just like me. So, the fact of the matter is, this injustice, the silver lining, might be that Heklina is the person who helps motivate change, systemic change. So I do think that keeping her name out there until there's real accountability and real change is good. Beyond that, because I do think I'm looking for a silver lining in all this ugliness because it's so overwhelming and so upsetting and it's re-traumatizing, the images. But beyond that, um, she was the funniest, most clever, I mean, really smart, wicked person. And I love wicked people. She was wicked. She was rotten in all the best ways. And she was able, this is one thing about her that I think is so important to remember. She never wanted to be seen as an activist. Not that there's anything wrong with that. She never wanted to be seen as a community leader. She sort of turned her nose up to all those kinds of like good-natured qualities. But at the end of the day, she was those things. She was all of that because of the way that she lived. She built community. I mean, huge communities, huge networks of supportive people and friends. And she was a beacon of light for all the misfits and all the queers who didn't fit in. And I keep saying this in all the interviews. She was secretly kind. So on stage and in person, she was the biggest bitch you could ever meet. She could read you for filth. She could just, if I fell down, she'd be the first person to laugh and laugh and laugh. But many, many, many of us over the years who were struggling in one way or another received the spirit of her generosity as long as we didn't talk about it. She didn't want to be known for it. She didn't want anyone to know that she paid your rent or that she took you to a recovery meeting or that that was not who she wanted to be known as. And I love that about her. I love that to me, that actually is an even deeper spirit of, kind of giving or specialness. Most people want credit for their good deeds. She did not.
Yeah, wow. I remember when I moved to San Francisco, it was 2002.
She
One of
remmed you.
she, I wish, if only. That,
Do you though? Do you?
I mean, that's how you know you've made it in San Francisco.
That's how you know you're straight.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think I qualified.
Yeah.
But I remember her events like setting the tone for me of like, this is what it means to be a queer person in San Francisco. This is the community. This is how we talk to each other. And, like you said,
Yeah.
wicked. But I also remember there was this time that it was at one of the shows. She was asking people to volunteer jokes from the audience. And people are like shouting jokes up to her and she's repeating them to the crowd. And we love it because something's gone wrong with the act. So she has to fill time. And somebody suggested some joke to her, and I remember her saying off mic, because I was close to the stage, she said off mic, no AIDS jokes. And it was this little moment that I was like, oh, she's really thinking about the audience and the community. And as mean as she seems, she's also got like just what you said, that kind streak where she
Yeah, yeah,
doesn't want to
yeah.
get too mean.
Yeah. And that depended on the day.
Uh huh.
Because I mean, I'm here to tell you, she was known to tell an AIDS joke here and there.
Oh, sure.
Um,
Yeah.
one of the reasons, I mean, one of the things about that was that Timmy Spence at the time was very known for that sort of comedy. And I think she really listened to people. I mean, the other thing is for as punk rock as we all were, when the community came around after, the word tranny was printed in the Wall Street Journal and GLAAD had to get involved and we had to kind of make a statement about the fact that this was our word and not their word. And, straight people had started using it in a derogatory fashion. Heklina really listened and changed the name of her club. Like she wasn't someone who was going to, she wasn't, yeah, she was secretly kind. So she just was, she was the way she was, but she could also be really offensive and she could be mean. I'm not gonna paint her as some sort of, you knew her, she was complicated.
Yeah. Like everybody.
Exactly.